Hello, cinefans. I'm Kendall Cruver, and this is Watching Classic Movies. My guest, Paula Guthat, is the co-founder of Cinema Detroit Movie Theater and the popular TCM Party hashtag. She came to me with a dilemma. How do you react when you learn that one of your cinematic faves has done something horrific? The answer is personal, often not definitive, and complicated, especially when you are a film programmer, as Paula is. We talked about the issue as it relates to our past, present, and future. Welcome, Paula. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Kendall. I'm really happy to be here.
Now, as the co-founder of Cinema Detroit, you have had quite a time, but I hear that you're back in the theater. You've got audiences coming back. How does that feel?
It feels really good.
Yeah.
It feels really good. It's very strange to not do your thing for this probably 14 months, 14, 15, 16 months, something like that. Because we closed March 16th of 2020 and we reopened like for real on July 2nd of 2021. I mean, it was tough. It was tough. We had some, private rentals for like birthday parties and things like that. And we did some online things with virtual cinema. I launched our own streaming platform, Cinema Detroit Marquee. And that was all very valuable. And I learned a lot, but it's just not the same as seeing a movie in person. I think we can all agree, to be really well received. People are coming in and saying, we're so glad you're back. Thank you for being here. So that's very gratifying, definitely. We've been able to show some like quality films from, like Summer of Soul, and now we've got French Dispatch. So it's been good. Yeah.
Well, I've enjoyed having the option of using your online service. I know you're kind of working through different options for that for the future, but I've enjoyed that because it's curated. So I find it easier to find a selection.
Yeah. Yeah, I worked really hard. I mean, we had access to quite a few libraries, and I tried to pick things that sort of reflected what I'm doing in my programming anyway, and then also some interesting double features that I can't always do. So remakes that were interesting just to compare, like Fun with Dick and Jane, the original, Fun with Dick and Jane, the remake, and see how society has changed, or in some cases not changed. So I was really trying to do some interesting things there, and I'm glad that people found it useful. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's nice to spend 5 minutes looking for a movie to watch instead of 20.
Instead of an hour. Yeah.
Which is a reality.
We're really trying to, we're really trying to have it be seen as films with inherent value as opposed to a bunch of content.
You did mention something that's what we will be talking about today, the idea of how things have changed and how they haven't. And what that is in essence, problematic faves.
Yes.
Directors, actors, producers, you name it, who you really love their work, but they've done some hideous things.
Yes.
So tell me about your take on this.
My take on this is that it's really difficult for me personally, and I imagine for other people too, because some of the problematic behavior was done by people who you didn't know they did it, and you came to them not knowing, and they're sort of the foundation of my classic movie habit, fixation, obsession. I think I told you about my experience seeing Errol Flynn in The Adventures of Robin Hood, and I was 11 years old, fell in love with the guy. He's dead. Who knows? Like, who cares? Whatever. He was alive on the screen, and I was in love with the guy. And then it turns out that in his life, he did some pretty sketchy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But his films are some of the best times you can have watching a classic movie. And I think he was underrated as an actor, as often happens when you have someone that has looks like that. And yeah, so finding out around the turn of the century, all of the stuff that went down. I still watch Errol Flynn movies. Do I feel weird about it? Definitely. And that's just one example. As I started to get into silent films, I'm a latecomer to that area of knowledge. I got, when I was a more than every so often blogger, I got, a review copy of a Chaplin biography. And a friend of mine told me, don't read it. Really? You don't want to know.
It was that
Yeah,
bad.
it was. And he's like, yeah, you don't want to know. You just don't want to know. And he was right. I don't want to know that he like kidnapped a teenage girl.
Yeah.
Like, and and that's just one example. I mean, he was not what you would call exemplary, right? And then, don't come at me, chaplain people. I don't want to get in trouble, but I kind of do. Like, I don't really care because the stuff happened, right? And so
Yeah.
it's this reckoning of like, I have this knowledge now. How does it affect me?
Yeah.
And how do I support or not support? And as a programmer, I do my own booking at the theater. I use a booker to get larger films, but for indies, classics, everything else, I'm my own thing. I don't, and then that's a direct opposite of how a chain works. Multiplexes are booked en masse by some other company states away, and they all just play what they're told.
Yeah.
So I've not booked a Woody Allen film since Blue Jasmine. I just won't do it.
Well, I do think that's interesting because just as a reviewer, when I had access to a screening of one of his films, I did decide not to go. And then I found at the opening night that several filmmakers, all of them women, had decided also not to attend because they just felt uncomfortable with that. And this brought me back to something, I believe it was Farron, also known as the self-styled siren. It was so long ago. But she said something on Twitter about, well, it's a lot easier when they're dead, which sounds crass.
Yes.
I believe
No, I mean,
she was talking about Hitchcock, like about things that he'd said and done. It was easier for her to say, of course I don't approve, but I can stomach his work. But with
right.
Alan still out there, it does hit differently. Because
because
feeling there's no
they're
justice.
continuing to do their awful things.
Yeah.
Which it brings in sort of the myth of cancel culture.
Yeah.
This is a myth that, if you do these horrible things, you'll be quote unquote canceled, you won't work. I'm trying to think of somebody who has actually been canceled, like not gotten any work ever again.
Yeah.
And I can't.
I mean,
they go away and they come back.
I looked up a few examples that I thought that they hadn't worked and they had. I really came up with nothing. It's hard because there's no apology, really. No sincere apology. There's no changing. There's no growth. This is what's so upsetting about it.
Yes.
And that what with Natalie Wood's sister writing about Kirk Douglas and how that there'd long been the rumor that he told her, and she's claiming that to be true. And he is gone, and I
he was
think
here for a good part of our lives.
Yes, but there was just things in reading about his life that he was somebody who always kind of turned me off anyway. That I always felt like something was wrong there, like he was maybe not even super right with himself and well at ease. So to hear something like that, I'm inclined to believe this story. I don't know for sure, but there's something there that really is wrong.
Yeah. Something happened.
Yeah.
At the hotel.
And another thing that hits me bad is Lex Barker, who is Tarzan. I'm
a bit less familiar with this one, I guess. Recap.
So this I learned in can't remember her last name. Lana Turner's daughter Cheryl wrote a memoir. And when Lana Turner was married to Lex Barker, he would assault Cheryl.
Oh.
And it was
terrible.
It was a brutal telling.
Yeah.
And I can't even stand the sight of him now because So now you can't go around with a little measuring tape about how bad things are. It's all there are things that are personal, but like Errol Flynn, there's a lot of really inappropriate things that he did.
Yes.
But there's also levels of maliciousness
that's true too.
And it's not a logical thing. It's
right.
And it's personal, and it's about a background and all that.
Yeah. And it's going to vary from person to person what you personally can tolerate. Like, I met Errol Flynn's daughter at the TCM Film Festival a few years back. Could not have been nicer. Sweetest lady. Posed for pictures, presented about her father. Her son was there. He was really nice. Like, she seemed normal, well-adjusted, even clear-eyed about her father. She didn't talk about, the sketchy stuff
Yeah.
he did, but about how he was a great dad, and gave her this feeling of being loved and, wanting to do anything to make his kids happy.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, wow. All right. So, yet a third side, maybe even, of this guy, right? There's the film persona, the, pervert, and then there's the great dad. Like,
It's complicated.
it is. I guess that's why I wanted to talk about it. It is so complicated.
And it is personal. And I mean, I think that the fact of somebody who's passed on, the way it's less complicated is they're not going to be able to do.
Right. They're not victimizing anybody else anymore.
Yeah.
Like, they can't hurt anyone anymore.
Yeah. There's no consequences be had anymore.
Yeah.
And I mean, to go back, you're saying that there is no cancel culture. For one, the concept of canceling is, I find, really unhelpful, and it just essentially a way to keep systems in place as they are, because of course you need to pay the consequences no matter who you are. And I think cancel culture is a way to push off that responsibility. It has really nothing to do with anything else. And so that's how I feel about the ones around now. But the ones in the past, there's always going to be people who love them, and there's always going to be people who can't stand them. It's a different thing.
Yeah.
I just feel like it's got to be a place where we can't judge, because no further harm can be done. So So personally, it's that way. Now, as a programmer, I can see how it's challenging for you, like how you might need to take the temperature a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't feel weird about it. Like, if I'm not gonna, nothing could induce me to program a Woody Allen film. Like, if people came to me and were like, we're never coming to your theater again if you don't book this Woody Allen film, I would be like, okay,
yeah,
that's your choice, right? Like, that to me is like really cut and dried. Now, there's like some other ones where there's like sort of like rumors and things like that of behavior that is not good, and that is really a gray area, because then you're like, is it true, is it not true? Like, in some cases, really worthy projects. Yeah, it can be a quandary. Like, it really can. And it sort of goes with, are you going to show films that have sexual violence in them?
Yeah.
Personally, I don't like to do that. I think there's enough of that going on. Like, I think it's a cop-out a lot of times. It's used for shock, plot device, when something else could have done just as well. I think it's lazy at this point. So I look at that very carefully.
Yeah.
But if it's in a film that's directed by a woman, there are films where women are telling their stories, and it includes that. Then what do you do?
Well, there's also just different perspectives on that kind of a film. I found it really educational to read. There's a horror writer, BJ Colanjo, I believe is her name, and she is a survivor. And a lot of that kind of movie is cathartic to her and helps her to process her stress over that.
Wow.
I think I had it in my mind, why are we doing this? Until I started reading perspectives like that. And it's led me to the conclusion that the way to process a lot of this is to just simply know different perspectives. I've seen that there's also a racial element to this.
Of course.
Now, is it Nat or Nate Parker, the director of Birth of a Nation?
Nate Parker. Yes, that was an interesting episode in my career.
Yeah.
As I had booked that before that came out. I actually booked it right when, Searchlight paid some insane amount of money for it. And on paper, the concept was awesome, right? And then all of that came out, and what I ended up doing was bringing in a toxic masculinity consultant
Oh,
to do some discussions so that it didn't go undiscussed, that there was context provided.
yeah. I think that's an important way to process it.
Mhm. Yeah, and we actually brought in some kids from all boys schools and let this guy work on them, for lack of a better term. Like, there is much in popular culture that is not progressive, that is based in stereotypes,
Yeah.
and that is prolonging the toxic masculinity.
And it's like,
Now, obviously, it can't be undone in an hour and a half, but I felt good about these kids, mostly Black and brown, having a Black man address these topics
mhm.
to them. So,
Around surrounding all that, this issue that must be dealt with, there is the fact
yes,
that this filmmaker,
yeah,
this who was clearly promising, disappeared a lot faster. It's hard
mhm,
not to believe that there
yeah,
was
that there was a racial
yeah.
factor. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
But he just sunk, and I believe he's got a
yes.
film coming out now, but it's not.
Mhm.
He didn't
This
just
is
bounce
years
back.
later
Yeah, yeah,
as
yeah,
opposed to a few months later.
yeah. So yeah, dipping back on classics, because we know that we have to deal with somebody who's alive. We have to face it. We have to
Mhm.
decide where we stand. We have to
Yeah.
decide, like, can we have growth, and progress here and
Mhm.
move on,
Yeah.
or is this just we can't stomach it? What do we do
Right.
about the classics? Because it's not, it goes into films too, of course. But what about these people? Because it's so much more complicated when they can't do anything else.
Mhm.
So say like a film festival, doing a Kirk Douglas film when there's this unproven but absolutely heavy, plausible
Plausible
yeah, yeah.
allegation.
Because I felt, uncomfortable having that book to review with his letters from his wife, because there was a lot of bad behavior in that book, which would jive with, that kind of a thing.
Mhm.
And it,
Yeah.
you don't know, but you just feel uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And I questioned whether I wanted to review it. I did, and I think I commented on how I felt a little bit,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
but it's so hard when you don't know.
Yeah.
So
And we'll never know.
no,
It's just a feeling that you just know,
yeah.
but you can't prove it.
And then there's things that you do know, like Alfred Hitchcock, you know,
Yes.
he never laid hands on anybody, but there were things.
He's abusive,
Yeah. He manipulated,
emotionally,
inappropriate.
psychologically abusive, and it could be argued that he kind of emotionally abuses the audience. Like, that tendency it's there. Like, he kind of tortures us a little bit, like, we're
Yeah.
made implicit in all this stuff that's going down, right? Because he
Mhm.
always kind of draws us into this. When Jimmy Stewart's spying on his neighbors, we're right there with him, like, he makes us into the voyeurs. So I think that's so much a part of his makeup. I really think that, wow, he's really, it's so suspenseful. He's really putting us through it, right?
Yeah.
Um,
A director, a creator, as opposed to an actor, you're going to have
mhm.
a different thing too. Like an actor might just be playing a role and you won't see that side of them, but a director, quite often, if they have power, they're going to put that personal imprint on it, and you will feel some of those things in
Yep.
the work.
Yep. Totally.
And I think that Rear Window is a really interesting example because while in the story he is the Cornell Woolrich story, it is voyeurism, but
Mhm.
it takes on a different dimension, the way he expands the people
Mhm.
that are being watched and the kind of people that are being watched and the way in which he's watching, like Miss
Mhm.
Corso, he's kind of
Yeah.
eyeing her,
How he's objectifying. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a really interesting point though about the creator, about those impulses showing up in the art.
Mhm.
There's nothing that's going to make me stop watching Alfred Hitchcock, but yeah, I am very aware of those impulses, and you're right, they do show up in the work. And I mean, that's what it comes down to with him. I'm trying to think of another director
where I feel it so acutely in the work. Because I mean, any, story about a director or an actress
Mhm.
is going to show the, they're smacking them on the butt and all these other things that
Mhm.
was just how it was.
Mhm.
So when you're thinking about that, it's like, well, it's almost like it's excellent if they didn't do something like that. But
Right. And this is what also complicates this whole sort of problematic faves thing is if we are participating, in culture that is promoting this sort of status quo, are things ever going to change? Because art dictates culture.
mhm.
Culture dictates art. So, I mean, what I've tried to do in my programming is maybe not perfect. What I try to do is yes, and
Yeah.
yes, we are going to show Wes Anderson, and we're going to show, the latest, say, James Bond movie. I've never shown a James Bond movie, but I came pretty close. And we're going to show films by women of color, Black and brown people, LGBTQ people, people with disabilities. I'm going to try to bring in all these other voices in the hope that in some small way, teeny tiny, that this will change things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
So
you're programming the things you promote. It's sort of like the company you keep. It's the same idea. Like who are
yeah, I
Yeah.
sort of do feel that way. I've never thought of it in that way, but that's a really perceptive
And
way to,
I
yeah.
think it is true. I mean, I will look at a film today, and if I see a trans character who's just trans, or if I see a brown girl in the lead, it's not quite the novelty that it used to be. And I think that has changed things. It's very hard in such a volatile time to believe that.
Yeah.
And there's so much more that needs to change, but I do think, I mean, you're making a good point, because what you're saying is we don't have to discard things so much as we need to add in things that give us a bigger picture. And in that bigger picture, we have more empathy and understanding, and
Right.
it kind of balances out those toxic feelings.
Yeah. And I just feel like the more we open up culture of all kinds to other voices, the chances of these things happening decreases the more that happens. I think, though, that the patriarchy is very strong.
Yeah.
It's going to take a lot to undo it.
I think it makes people feel those structures so old.
Yeah.
And people have the feeling that they've worked somewhere in their guts. And so it makes them feel unsafe to have it challenged. And I mean, just given the response to TCM's series,
Yeah.
where they looked back on problematic faves, it really made people mad because they felt like they were being told they were bad people. I saw that more than once. And just the idea of wokeism, or any other word you're going to use to say, I feel uncomfortable with this examination, it makes me feel bad.
Mhm.
I think that the more we realize we're just learning, and that it's not it's not
Mhm.
about your feelings, it's
No.
about our world. It's
Right.
about the way that our world has been and the way our
Mhm.
world is. And we will all benefit from understanding those different perspectives, from examining a thing.
Mhm.
It hurts, it feels bad. I look back on some things that I've done, as a white lady, and I cringe at the
Yeah,
sensitivity.
for sure.
And I know that the only realistic way to look at it is I'm always aspiring to do better, and I've grown
It's
up
a
in
process.
structure. I've grown up.
Right.
It is a process. I tell my kids this all the time. It is a
Yep.
process, and you
Can't be unracist overnight.
no,
Came from a racist society.
yeah, we have to forge forward and not have it be about like your feelings
Yeah.
or anything small, because it's big. It's
Right.
big, and our world is big, and I think that we become bigger people by acknowledging all these different perspectives. I gotta say, it's as hard as it has been to see people kind of come out and be a little nastier, and how social media has brought some really toxic things into our world. I have learned a lot about our world through those things too. I've had different perspectives and things coming at me in real life that I understand better because of
Mhm.
people talking, say, on Twitter. Following somebody who is different from me
Yes.
who like maybe they wrote a great movie review, but they're so different from me in a lot of ways
Mhm.
that I'm like,
Yes.
you dig into native Twitter, you
Uh-huh.
follow people with various disabilities, different races, and suddenly you've got this beautiful tapestry and you want them all to be well.
Right. No, I agree completely. And then it makes me really upset when somebody comes along and is like, well, that they aren't valid. They don't count. This society is, a white male society, and anything that challenges that, I'm going to be negative about and, issue death threats or whatever, that makes me really upset because it's un-American.
I mean, it really technically is.
To me, it is un-American. I think things like ancestry.com, the people kind of scoff at it and it's not real science and blah, blah, blah. But it's like for people to see that, oh, gee, my family hasn't been here that long, like a couple generations, maybe.
Yeah.
Like on one side of my family and then on the other side, like a long time. But still, I am not a Native American.
Yeah.
But people are just taking it in a different way too, of like probably the superiority of their ethnicity or whatever. Who knows? People always take stuff in weird ways. But to me, it's like it's showing that everybody here is from somewhere else except Indigenous people. You know what I mean? So
and it's almost literally everybody.
Almost literally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, just about everybody.
So that makes me like look at these films and these people in a different way, because I think they're what it really we're talking about is that behavior supports a structure that doesn't help all.
Right.
So if you, instead of looking away, deal with it, talk about it.
Yep.
You can say, you have the space to say, I can appreciate this art. And I'm looking at this art with my eyes wide open. I understand it. And of course, there's, and as a programmer, I suppose that's the way to go, which is what you've been doing is
really trying to,
to go back to that, the pandemic. Do you think this has made people reflect anymore on this kind of a thing? Do you think that having that space?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, you can kind of see to people's relationship to work has changed. They're not willing to be in work that honestly is abusive, the way, fast food outlets, the workers there are leaving or they're going on strike or they're just leaving in the middle of their shift. I was reading the Washington Post. This happened at a couple places. And I think life became more precious and people don't want to waste it.
How do you think that would affect the view of the arts? I mean, do you think that has any effect at all on how people are going to consume things? Maybe we don't know yet, actually.
Yeah, I think we're in the middle of sort of reckoning with that because at the same time, there's this like explosion of streaming. Like, I mean, the theatrical window is basically gone, which eventually was going to happen, but the pandemic sped it up by, I believe, a couple of years. And I don't know how it's gonna affect it. Yeah, I think the jury is out on that one. But I think people just are like, you know what, life's too short. I'm not gonna get harassed, abused, underpaid. Like I don't think people are lazy, and I don't think it has anything to do with unemployment checks.
No.
I think people were just like, I could die doing this, and guess what? You're not paying me enough. Yeah. And I'm being abused. And so I think it's just a recognition of like, I don't want to spend my time doing this anymore.
People found their limits.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like that's a very visual, public way that people are finding the limits, and it's bound to extend to other things.
Yeah. Stuff that's going on, people getting shot to make a movie. Is it worth dying for?
Yeah.
In my book, no. Obviously, like I think it just caused so much change in such a short time. Racial reckoning needed to happen in such a huge way. And that's welcome that sped up to the point where, I just think we're in this moment where the world has changed a lot, not just because of the pandemic, but also because of Me Too, Black Lives Matter, all of these types of reckonings where we don't really know where we are. Like, things are changing so fast.
I think that's the best way to put it. I mean, we don't know where we are, and since we can't tell the future, one way to figure it out, and things like this, there's not an answer.
Right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I would never seek an answer.
Yeah, there's not an answer, but there's a way. You decide what you can live with,
Mhm.
You decide what's acceptable, and in figuring that out, you learn how to move forward. Paula, I appreciate you having this conversation with me. There was a lot of aha moments. I think it's so tricky and uncomfortable to talk about this kind of thing, but we really must, because that's how, it's not just how we exist now, it's how we move forward. Having a background on what has been helps that a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And there were many aha moments for me as well. And I was so happy to talk about this with you. And thank you for having me on.
For show notes, including information about streaming films via Cinema Detroit, go to watchingclassicmovies.com. There you can also find ways to support the show. Please consider giving Watching Classic Movies a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. Thank you for listening. This is Kendall Krufer, Watching Classic Movies. Until next time.